The Empress of Velcorin had conquered 12 star systems before she learned to weep. Her throne room stretched wider than any cathedral on earth, built from crystal that sang when truth was spoken and shattered when lies took root. And on this night, as prisoners knelt in chains before her judgment seat, a human man cradled a small alien child and whispered something the galaxy had long forbidden. A lullaby. A promise. A secret that would unravel everything the Empire believed about the species they had enslaved. Before the first note ended, the Empress would remember what she had buried beneath 1,000 years of conquest. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. You won't want to miss what happens next. The throne room of Velcorin pulsed with light the color of dying suns. Crystal pillars rose like frozen, and lightning, each one carved from the heart of a conquered world. The air tasted of ozone and empire, sharp enough to burn human lungs. Along the walls, courtiers stood in their ceremonial armor, scales gleaming, eyes multifaceted and cold. They had gathered for the monthly tribunal, where the Empress rendered judgment on those who dared defy her eternal reign. Tonight's prisoners knelt in magnetic restraints, their bodies held rigid by invisible force. Among them, a human man named Daniel Cross held something precious against his chest, a child, not human, not his blood, but his daughter in every way that mattered. Her name was Lyra, and her skin shimmered with the pale blue luminescence of the Velcorin people. She was 7 years old, though her species aged differently, slower, their childhood stretching across decades. Her silver hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her large eyes, violet-rimmed with gold, looked up at her father with absolute trust. She was terrified. The court did not notice her fear. They noticed only the abomination. A human raising a Velcorin child. It was forbidden by the doctrine of separation, enacted 300 years prior when humanity had been conquered and relegated to labor colonies across the outer systems. Humans were workers, servants, easily replaced. They were not parents, especially not to the children of their conquerors. The Empress sat upon her throne of living crystal, her form both beautiful and terrible. Her carapace shimmered with colors that shifted like oil across water, and her crown, woven from starlight captured at the moment of a supernova, cast fractals of brilliance across the chamber. She had not spoken yet. She rarely needed to. Her silence was judgment enough. Chancellor Vorik stepped forward, his voice booming with the certainty of law. The human Daniel Cross stands accused of violating the doctrine of separation. He has harbored a Velcorin child for 6 rotations, raising her as his own, poisoning her mind with human sentiment. Vorik's mandibles clicked in disgust. He has taught her to call him father. The court hissed approval. The word father sounded obscene in their mouths. Daniel did not flinch. His arms tightened around Lyra, and she pressed her face against his shoulder. Her small hands clutched the fabric of his worn jacket, the only possession he had kept from Earth. The penalty, Vorik continued, is separation. The child will be re-educated. The human will be executed. Lyra began to tremble. Daniel had known this moment would come. He had prepared for it the way a man prepares for winter, gathering what warmth he could, knowing it would never be enough. 6 years ago, he had found Lyra in the rubble of a collapsed mining shaft on Outpost 12. Her parents, Velcorin engineers overseeing human labor crews, had died in the collapse. No one claimed her. Velcorin society did not adopt orphans. They placed them in institutional creches where efficiency mattered more than affection. Daniel had carried her from the rubble, her tiny body covered in dust, her eyes wide and uncomprehending. He should have turned her over to the authorities. Instead, he had taken her to his quarters in the human sector, a cramped room with walls that leaked cold and a single window facing the void. He had sung to her that first night because she would not stop crying. An old song his own mother had sung to him, back when Earth still had open skies and fields that stretched beyond sight. Lyra had fallen asleep in his arms. He had been her father ever since, Now, standing in chains before the Empress, he felt the weight of every moment they had stolen together, every meal shared, every story told, every night she had asked him to sing her to sleep. The court expected him to beg. Humans always begged. It was one of the few entertainments the Velcoran nobility permitted themselves, watching lesser beings grovel for mercy that would never come. Daniel lifted his head and met the Empress's gaze. Her eyes, ancient and cold, studied him with the interest one might give to an insect displaying unusual behavior. He did not look away. "I have nothing to say in my defense," Daniel said quietly, his voice carried in the crystalline chamber, clear and steady. "I broke your law. I knew the consequences. I would do it again." Gasps rippled through the courtiers. Such defiance from a human was unheard of. Vorik's spines rattled with indignation. "You admit your crime?" Chancellor Vorik demanded. "I admit I became a father," Daniel replied. "If that is a crime in your empire, then your empire is built on sand." The crystal pillars hummed, a low frequency that made the air vibrate. The Velcoran believed their architecture responded to truth and lies, though none could prove it. The hum intensified. Lyra lifted her face from Daniel's shoulder. Her voice, small and trembling, broke the tension like a stone through glass. "Please do not take my father." The court fell silent, a Velcoran child speaking in defense of a human. It was worse than forbidden. It was incomprehensible. The Empress leaned forward slightly, her crown casting fractured rainbows across the floor. For the first time, she spoke. Her voice was silk over iron. "The child has been corrupted," the Empress said. "She does not understand what she is defending." "She understands love," Daniel said. "Something your doctrine cannot quantify." Vorik moved to strike him, claws extended, but the Empress raised one hand. The Chancellor froze mid-strike. "Let the humans speak," the Empress commanded. Her eyes had not left Daniel's face. "I am curious what defense he believes love provides against the law." Daniel shifted Lyra gently in his arms. She was too big to carry like this anymore, but she held onto him as if he were the only solid thing in a collapsing universe. Daniel's throat tightened. He could feel Lyra's heartbeat against his chest, rapid and afraid. Around them, the court waited with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. The magnetic restraints hummed at his wrists, holding him in place, but they had not separated him from Lyra yet. That mercy, if it could be called that, would not last. "Love is not a defense," Daniel said finally. "It is a fact, like gravity, like light. You can deny it, outlaw it, try to legislate it away, but it exists whether your doctrine acknowledges it or not." The Empress tilted her head, an almost curious gesture. "Humans speak of love as if it were a force of nature. We have studied your species for 3 centuries. We have found it to be nothing more than chemical dependency, oxytocin and dopamine, evolutionary programming to ensure offspring survival." "Then why does it transcend biology?" Daniel asked. "Why does it cross species?" Vorik laughed, a harsh clicking sound. "It does not cross species. What you feel is projection, delusion. The child is not yours. She is mine," Daniel said quietly, "because I chose her, and she chose me." Lyra's fingers tightened on his jacket. She turned her face toward the Empress, and for a moment, the powerful and the powerless locked eyes. "The child and the conqueror. My father sings to me," Lyra said. Her voice was steadier now, as if she had found courage in her father's defiance. "Every night before I sleep, he sings earth songs. He says they are from a place called home." The court stirred uncomfortably. Music was not forbidden, but human music was considered primitive, discordant, unsuitable for Velcoran ears. It was the noise of a defeated people clinging to a dead world. "What does he sing?" the Empress asked. The question surprised everyone, including Daniel. Lyra looked up at her father, seeking permission. He nodded slightly. "He sings about stars," Lyra said, "and about someone named Stella, and about a place called Tennessee where the grass is green and the sky is not full of ships." She paused, remembering. And he sings one song that makes me feel safe, even when I am afraid, even when the lights go out and I think I am alone. What is this song called? The Empress pressed. Lyra's voice dropped to a whisper. He calls it a lullaby. The word landed in the chamber like a stone in still water. Ripples of confusion spread through the courtiers. The Velcoran language had no equivalent word. Their children were raised in creches, educated through neural integration, taught efficiency and duty before they could walk. They did not need songs to sleep. They did not need comfort in the dark. Sing it, the Empress commanded. Daniel's blood went cold. Your Majesty, sing it, she repeated. Or the child will be taken now, and you will watch her re-education begin before your execution. Lyra clutched him tighter. Her whole body had gone rigid with fear. Daniel closed his eyes. His hands, still bound by magnetic restraints, could not hold a guitar, could not strum the chords that usually accompanied the melody. But his voice remained his own. He drew a breath, and in the throne room of an alien empire, surrounded by those who had conquered his world and enslaved his people, Daniel Cross began to sing. His voice was rough, worn by years of labor and loss, but it carried. The melody was simple, ancient, passed down through generations of humans who had sung their children to sleep long before the Velcoran had ever reached Earth. The melody unfurled like a flower opening in darkness. Soft, gentle, impossibly fragile in a room built for power, Daniel sang of moonlight and shadows, of dreams that carried children through the night, of morning coming no matter how dark the hours before dawn. The words were English, a language most Velcoran considered dead, useful only for labor commands and inventory lists. But the meaning transcended translation. It lived in the spaces between notes, in the way his voice softened on certain syllables, in the rhythm that matched a resting heartbeat. Lyra's breathing slowed against his chest. Even terrified, even surrounded by those who would tear her from his arms, her body remembered this song, remembered safety. The court stood frozen. Several courtiers shifted uncomfortably, their scaled faces unreadable. But something had changed in the air. The crystal pillars had begun to resonate, a harmonic so low it was felt rather than heard. The Empress sat perfectly still. Her eyes, ancient and cold, had closed. Daniel continued singing. The second verse spoke of stars watching over sleeping children, of love that stretched across distances too vast to measure, of hands that would always reach through darkness to find the lost. His voice cracked slightly on the final line, emotion bleeding through discipline. The last note faded into silence. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Then Lyra whispered, barely audible, "Thank you, Earth Father." The Empress opened her eyes. Something in her expression had shifted, though Daniel could not name what. She looked older suddenly, as if the song had pulled something heavy to the surface. "Where did you learn that melody?" the Empress asked. Her voice had lost its iron edge. "From my mother," Daniel said. "Who learned it from hers? It is old, older than the conquest, older than our first ships, maybe older than memory itself." "That is impossible," Vorik interjected. "Humans have no cultural memory extending beyond primitive record-keeping." "But," the Empress raised her hand for silence. She was staring at Daniel with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "Sing it again," she commanded. "Just the first verse. Slower." Daniel obeyed. This time, as he sang, he watched the Empress. Her eyes closed again, and her lips moved almost imperceptibly, as if she were recalling something buried deep. When he finished, she stood. The entire court gasped. The Empress never stood during tribunal. It suggested uncertainty, weakness. She descended 3 steps from her throne, her movements deliberate, her crown casting light like broken glass across the floor. "I know this song," the Empress said quietly. The court erupted in confused whispers. Vorik stepped forward, spines rattling. "Your Majesty, that is impossible. Human music has never been taught in I know this song," the Empress repeated, louder now. Her gaze had not left Daniel's face. I heard it 300 years ago, in a medical bay, after the first invasion. She paused, and her next words fell like stones into water. A human woman sang it while she died. Daniel's breath caught. The Empress took another step closer. She was a combat medic. She had saved 17 Velcoran soldiers before the ceiling collapsed. When we pulled her from the rubble, she was singing. The throne room had gone deathly quiet. She sang to comfort us while she bled. The Empress's voice had become something softer than iron, something closer to sorrow. She stood now at the base of her throne, closer to Daniel than any prisoner had been allowed in living memory. The courtiers pressed against the walls, uncertain whether to intervene or bear witness. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen, the Empress said. She had 17 soldiers under her care when the orbital strike hit. Velcoran soldiers, my soldiers. She paused, the weight of centuries pressing into those words. The structure collapsed, steel and concrete, fire. I was there in the aftermath, leading recovery efforts. We found her pinned beneath a support beam, both legs crushed, internal bleeding. She had minutes at most. Daniel felt Lyra's grip tighten on his jacket. The child was listening now, her fear momentarily suspended by the strangeness of this confession. She should have been screaming, the Empress continued. Should have been begging for mercy, for painkillers, for anything. Instead, she was singing. That song, the one you just sang. The crystal pillars hummed their low frequency, responding to truth spoken aloud. My lieutenant wanted to leave her. Said she was beyond saving, that we needed to focus on our own. But I ordered them to stay. I knelt beside her in the rubble. The Empress's eyes, ancient and tired, met Daniel's. I asked her why she was singing. She said the young ones were frightened. That was what she called my soldiers, the young ones. They were twice her age by your years, but she saw their fear and sang to comfort them. Vorik shifted uncomfortably. Several courtiers looked away. This was history they had not been taught. History that complicated the narrative of human primitiveness, of their deserved subjugation. She died singing that song, the Empress said. Her last breath carried the final note. And when she was gone, 3 of my soldiers wept. Velcoran warriors, crying for a human medic. She turned to face her court. I ordered the memory suppressed, classified, because it contradicted everything we needed to believe about the species we were conquering. That they were lesser, that they felt less, that their bonds were chemical accidents rather than something real. The throne room felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls had drawn closer. I convinced myself I had imagined the power of that moment. That grief had made me sentimental, that it meant nothing. The Empress looked down at Lyra, who stared back with wide, uncomprehending eyes. But I buried something else that night. Her final words. She looked at me, this dying woman, and said, "Sing this to someone someday. When you forget why you're fighting, it will help you remember." Daniel felt his throat tighten. The Empress ascended one step back toward her throne, then stopped. "I forgot," she said quietly. "For 300 years I forgot, until tonight." She turned to Vorik, and her voice regained its edge of command. "You say this human has corrupted the child. I say he has done what we abandoned. He has given her what we designed out of our culture centuries ago." "Your Majesty," Vorik protested. The doctrine," the Empress interrupted, "was written by conquerors who needed to believe their conquest was righteous. Perhaps it is time we examined what we buried to maintain that belief." Vorik's spines extended fully, a threat display that made several courtiers step back. His voice shook with barely controlled rage. "Your Majesty, you cannot mean to pardon this violation. The doctrine of separation has maintained order for 3 centuries. If we allow humans to raise our children, to pollute their minds with primitive sentiment." "Primitive," the Empress repeated, tasting the word. "Is that what we call a species that comforts the dying, that sings to frighten children across the barrier of species?" She descended another step. Perhaps we should examine what we have built in the name of advancement. The Chancellor's mandibles clicked rapidly. Then, let us test the human properly. If he claims this bond is real, if you believe his music holds meaning, let him prove it under tribunal law. A cold smile crossed his face. Let him demonstrate that what he has taught the child serves her better than what we would provide. Daniel felt ice settle in his stomach. Tribunal trials were designed to break. They measured worth through impossible standards, through tests that assumed Velkoran superiority. "What test do you propose?" the Empress asked. Vorik gestured to the child in Daniel's arms. "Separate them. For one solar rotation. Place the child in a standard creche with others her age. Place the human in holding. If their bond is as he claims, as you remember it, it will survive a single day apart." He paused. "But I wager the child will forget him before the lights dim, that she will adapt as all Velkoran children do, efficiently, without the weakness of attachment. And when she does, we will have proof that his influence was dependency, not love." Lyra made a small sound against Daniel's chest. Her whole body had gone rigid. "And if she does not forget?" the Empress asked quietly. "If, after one rotation, she still calls for him, still remembers his songs?" Vorik's smile widened. "Then I will personally recommend his pardon and the revision of the doctrine. But she will forget, Your Majesty. Velkoran children are designed to adapt. It is our strength." The Empress looked at Daniel. For a long moment, their eyes met. He could see the question there, the uncertainty. She was asking his permission for this cruelty, asking if he could survive watching Lyra taken from his arms. Daniel looked down at his daughter. Her violet eyes met his, and in them he saw trust so absolute it broke his heart. "Lyra," he whispered, "do you remember what I told you? About the stars?" She nodded against his chest. "You said they are always there, even when we cannot see them, even when clouds cover the sky." "That's right." He pressed his forehead gently to hers. "And what else did I say?" "You said love is like starlight. It travels even through the dark, even across impossible distances." Her voice wavered. "You said nothing could stop it from reaching me." Daniel's eyes burned, but he did not let tears fall. Not here. Not where they would be seen as weakness. He looked up at the Empress. "One rotation," he said. "But I have one condition." Vorik laughed. "You are not in a position to make demands, human." "Let me give her something to hold on to," Daniel said. "One object. My choice." The Empress considered this. Vorik began to protest, but she silenced him with a gesture. "What object?" she asked. Daniel shifted Lyra gently in his arms, turning slightly so the magnetic restraints would not bite as deeply into his wrists. "My guitar," he said. "It is in my quarters. Section 7, room 243. The only thing I brought from Earth." Murmurs rippled through the court. Musical instruments were not forbidden, but they were considered primitive tools, relics of a pre-digital age when species had not yet learned to encode sound mathematically. "A wooden box with strings," Vorik scoffed. "What purpose could that possibly serve?" "It was my mother's," Daniel said quietly. "And her father's before that. It is older than the conquest. Older than your first ships in Earth's orbit." He looked at Lyra. "She has fallen asleep to its sound every night for 6 years. The Empress studied him with those ancient eyes. "You believe this object will sustain her memory of you?" "I believe," Daniel said, "that some things cannot be quantified by your measurements. That love leaves traces in worn wood and loosened strings. That memory lives in our hands as much as our minds." He paused. "And I believe my daughter knows the difference between what is real and what is efficient." The throne room fell silent. Even Vorik seemed momentarily at a loss for words. The Empress nodded slowly. "Very well. The guitar will be retrieved and given to the child." She turned to her guards. "Bring it here. Now." 2 guards departed with liquid efficiency. The court waited in uncomfortable silence. Lyra had not moved from Daniel's arms, her face still pressed against his shoulder. Minutes stretched like hours. Then the guards returned, carrying between them a battered acoustic guitar. The wood was scarred from years of use, the finish worn away where fingers had pressed countless chords. The strings were mismatched, replaced over time with whatever Daniel could scavenge. It was not beautiful by any objective standard. But when Daniel saw it, something in his chest loosened slightly. The guards set it carefully on the floor before the Empress. She gestured, and the magnetic restraints around Daniel's wrists released with a soft click. He nearly collapsed from the sudden freedom, but caught himself. Slowly, carefully, he knelt and picked up the guitar. The weight of it was familiar, comforting. He settled it against his knee, his fingers finding their positions without thought. Muscle memory older than Lyra, older than his captivity. He played a single chord. The sound rang through the crystal chamber, pure and clear. The pillars responded, harmonizing with frequencies they had never encountered. Several courtiers gasped. The resonance was unlike anything their architecture had produced before. Vorik stepped forward. Enough theater, the test begins now. Take the child to creche 17, place the human in holding cell 9. The guitar goes with the girl. Daniel's hands stilled on the strings. This was the moment, the separation. He looked down at Lyra, and she looked up at him with eyes that held entire universes of trust. "Remember," he whispered, "starlight travels even through the dark." Then the guards came, and his daughter was lifted from his arms. The holding cell was silent, except for the hum of energy barriers. Daniel sat on the metal bench, his back against the cold wall, and counted seconds. Each one felt like a small death. He imagined Lyra in the creche, surrounded by Velkoran children who had never known a parent's touch, who had been raised on efficiency and doctrine. He imagined her clutching the guitar, too large for her small hands, trying to remember the chords he had taught her. He imagined her forgetting. The rotation passed with geological slowness. No windows existed in holding cells, no way to mark time except by the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He tried not to think about what would happen if Vorik was right. If Velkoran children truly were designed to adapt so completely that love could be erased in a single day, he tried not to think about execution, about never seeing Lyra again, about dying in this cold room without even the comfort of his guitar to carry him through. But mostly, he tried not to think about her face when the guards had pulled her away, the way she had reached for him, silent, too frightened to even cry. When the energy barrier finally dropped, two guards entered. Their expressions were unreadable behind their helmets. "It is time," one said. They led him back through the crystal corridors, back toward the throne room. Daniel's legs felt weak, his hands shook. This was judgment. This was the moment that would determine whether love was real or merely chemical fiction. The throne room doors split apart. Daniel stepped through and stopped. The entire court had assembled again, but the chamber felt different, quieter. The cruel anticipation had been replaced by something else. Confusion, perhaps, or uncertainty. The Empress sat upon her throne, but her posture had changed. She leaned forward slightly, her crown dim, as if some internal light had been turned down. And there, at the base of the throne, sat Lyra. The guitar rested across her lap, far too big for her small frame. Her fingers were positioned on the fretboard, unpracticed but determined. Her eyes, red from crying, locked onto Daniel the moment he entered. "Earthfather," she whispered. The two words carried across the vast chamber. Daniel's knees nearly buckled. Vorik stood to the side, his spines flat against his back. He looked diminished somehow, defeated. "The child," the Empress said quietly, "did not forget." She gestured toward Lyra. "Show him." Lyra's small fingers pressed down on the strings. The chord was imperfect, slightly out of tune but recognizable. She strummed once, twice. Then she began to sing. Her voice was thin, wavering, but she sang the lullaby. Every word in English, a language she should not know, had no reason to remember. She sang about moonlight and shadows, about dreams and morning. She sang the song her father had given her, and she did not stop, even when her voice cracked, even when tears ran down her luminescent cheeks. The crystal pillars began to resonate. The harmonic built slowly, filling the chamber with sound that bypassed ears and struck directly at something deeper. Several courtiers touched their chests, confused by sensations they had no names for. The Empress stood. The Empress descended her throne in complete silence. Every eye in the chamber followed her movement. She walked past Vorik without acknowledgement, past the guards, past the courtiers who had spent 300 years believing in the supremacy of their detachment. She stopped before Lyra. The child's fingers had stilled on the guitar strings. She looked up at the Empress with uncertainty, her song trailing into silence. But her other hand reached out, stretching toward Daniel, who remained frozen between guards. "You taught her our language," the Empress said to Daniel. "Our customs, how to move through our world. Yet she sings in yours." "I taught her both," Daniel replied. His voice was hoarse. "I wanted her to know where she came from, and where I came from, so she could choose who she wanted to be." The Empress knelt. The court gasped collectively. An empress kneeling before a human child was beyond protocol. It was beyond comprehension. She reached out slowly and touched the guitar, her fingers tracing the worn wood where Daniel's hands had polished it smooth over years of playing. "This instrument," she said quietly, "is more than wood and metal. It carries memory in its grain. I can feel it." She looked up at Daniel. "How many hands have held this?" "4 generations," Daniel said. "My great-grandfather made it, on Earth, before the factories, before the wars, when humans still had time to shape things slowly." The Empress's fingers moved to the strings. She plucked one experimentally. The note rang clear. "In our culture, we build nothing by hand anymore. Everything is precision manufactured, perfect, identical." She plucked another string. "But perfection carries no history, no warmth." Vorik found his voice, though it had lost its earlier certainty. "Your Majesty, the test has concluded." The child remembered because she is young, malleable. "It proves nothing about the superiority of human methods. It proves," the Empress said, standing, "that we have forgotten something essential." She turned to face her court. 300 years ago, we conquered Earth because we believed ourselves more advanced, more evolved. We looked at human emotion and called it weakness. We looked at their attachments and called it inefficiency. Her voice grew stronger. "But we forgot what Dr. Sarah Chen showed me in her final moments. That strength is not the absence of feeling. It is the choice to feel despite the cost." She lifted the guitar from Lyra's lap and carried it to Daniel. The guards stepped aside without being ordered. She placed the instrument in his hands. "Play it," she commanded. "Play the song your daughter sang. Let this court hear what 3 centuries of doctrine tried to erase." Daniel's fingers trembled as they found the strings. He looked at Lyra, who was watching him with absolute faith, and then he played. This time, the melody filled the chamber completely. The crystal pillars sang with it, harmonizing, amplifying. Daniel's voice joined the guitar, rough and beautiful. Lyra stood and walked to him. The guards did not stop her. She pressed against his side. And together, father and daughter sang the lullaby that had traveled across species, across conquest, across the void between worlds. When the final note faded, the Empress spoke a name. "Sarah Chen taught me this 300 years ago. Tonight, you reminded me." The changes began slowly, like ice melting at the edges of a frozen lake. The doctrine of separation was not abolished overnight. 3 centuries of law could not be undone with a single song, but it could be questioned, and questions once asked have a way of multiplying. Within a lunar cycle, the Empress convened a council unlike any in Velcoran history. She invited humans to sit at the table, not as servants or laborers, but as voices with equal weight. Daniel was among them, Lyra at his side. The courtiers who had mocked him now studied him with cautious respect, as if he were a puzzle they had only just realized needed solving. The first reform was modest. Human guardians could petition for custodial rights of orphaned Velcoran children, provided they passed cultural competency standards. The second reform went deeper. Creches across the empire began incorporating what the Velcoran called attachment protocols. Children were given individual caregivers. They were held, sung to, comforted. The results were not immediate, but they were measurable. Velcoran children raised with these protocols showed increased empathy, improved collaborative skills, and something the Velcoran had no previous metric for: happiness. In the throne room, a new tradition emerged. Once per lunar cycle, the Empress held what she called the Hour of Remembering. Citizens of any species could bring objects that carried memory: a worn tool, a piece of clothing, a musical instrument. They would share the stories these objects held, and the court would listen. Daniel brought his guitar to the first hour of remembering. He played 3 songs. By the third, several Velcoran nobles were wiping their eyes, confused by the wetness they found there. Vorik did not attend these gatherings. He had been reassigned to archival duties in the outer colonies, a position of minimal influence, but he was not executed. The Empress had learned that transformation required witnesses, even reluctant ones. Lyra grew. By human standards, she remained a child, but by Velcoran measurements, she had entered the age of choosing. She could select her name, her path, her identity. She chose to keep the name her father had given her. She chose to study both human and Velcoran history. And she chose, when asked, to describe herself simply as daughter of 2 worlds. On quiet evenings, Daniel still sang her to sleep. She was far too old for it by any reasonable standard, but reason had never governed love. They would sit in their quarters, larger now, with a window facing actual stars instead of manufactured light. He would play the guitar that had survived 4 generations and 1 conquest. She would rest her head on his shoulder and close her eyes. Sometimes the Empress would pass by their quarters on her evening walks through the residential sectors. She never interrupted, but she would pause, just for a moment, and listen to the sound of a human lullaby drifting through alien corridors. It reminded her of something buried, something precious, something she had spent 3 centuries trying to forget and one night learning to remember. The galaxy did not become gentle, but it became truer, and truth, once permitted to breathe, has a way of reshaping everything it touches. Even empires built on the belief that some species feel less, even hearts encased in carapace and crystal.